Be honest. You've been copy-pasting builds from the internet, haven't you? That stops today. This isn't another copy build guide. This is how to actually build Sorcerer the right way. From damage types to gear, Paragons, Glyphs, and skills, you'll learn what truly makes Sorc unstoppable. Let's get into it. Damage types. Alright, let's break down how your Sorcerer actually deals damage. I want to show you a super simplified version of the damage formula. It might sound a little complicated at first, but once you understand this, you'll have basically solved half the game already. Type 1. Additive damage buckets. Additive damage just means all these bonuses get added together first and then applied before the big multipliers. They're important, but they don't hit as hard as multiplicative damage because they stack additively, not multiplicatively. Elemental damage types. We've got cold, lightning, and fire. These are your core elemental damage sources, non-physical, and they scale directly with your intelligence stat. Think of them as your Sorc's bread and butter. Conditional or distance-based damage. This covers damage versus crowd-controlled, damage versus elites, damage versus close enemies, and so on. You'll usually get these from your Paragon boards, skill tree nodes, or aspects. Skill-type damage. Things like core skill damage, ultimate damage, or conjuration damage. I'll go into more detail on these when we cover skill trees, so just keep them in mind for now. Damage over time. Burning, poisoning, bleeding, anything that ticks over time falls into this category. Doties add up the same way as other additive bonuses, but remember, they can't crit or overpower. Type 2. Multiplicative damage buckets. Now here's the juicy stuff. Every damage type here multiplies your total damage directly. That's why they're so powerful, and usually why you want to focus your entire build around one or two of them. Critical strike. Every crit automatically applies a baseline multiplier, 50%. Your plus crit damage stats are additive with each other, and then they stack on top of that baseline multiplier. Vulnerable damage. Whenever you apply vulnerable through chill, freeze, certain aspects, or skills, you get a baseline X 20% multiplier. All your plus vulnerable damage stats stack additively and then multiply your final damage. Overpower damage. This one's different. It has its own baseline multiplier, up to X 50%, and gets extra additive scaling from your max life and fortify. Tooltip X% effects. If you see something written as X% increased damage in an aspect, a Paragon node, or a glyph that's multiplicative, always watch for the little x instead of plus. Main stat. Every single point of intelligence gives 0.1% skill damage. That means your main stat is always a multiplier. It never gets lumped into additive. The rule of thumb here, pick one or two of these multipliers and build your character around them. If you spread yourself too thin, your damage falls off. For example, in my current Pyro Crit Hydra build, I've gone all in on critical strike. Every aspect, every Paragon board, every skill tree node is feeding into crit. The result? Damage that absolutely melts bosses. That's the difference between a May Sorc and a season-dominating one. And hey, if that sounds interesting, check out the build link in the description after this video. You'll see exactly how I've stacked crit multipliers to push Hydra up to 300 billion damage. Before moving on to gear type, let's give a brief example, and let's prioritize the following damage types. Hydra damage comes first because it scales with everything. Conjuration and core multipliers, generic percent damage, key passives, even uniques like Ophidian Iris. All of it stacks, turning every point you invest into absurd, snowballing damage. Next is critical damage, third is damage to burning. After that comes fire damage, and finally damage to elites. Gear types. Alright, if you made it this far and you actually understood the damage buckets, congrats. You've already solved half the puzzle. If not, honestly, go back and rewatch that part. It's worth it. Now, let's move into gear. I'm not going to bore you by listing every single slot like gloves, boots, pants. Instead, I'll break down the key decisions that actually make or break your Sorc build. Weapons. First, let's clear something up. Two-handers deal more damage than one-handers. And listen, I didn't just read that off some random Reddit post. Back when I first tried to confirm this, I literally spent hours testing, digging through every half-finished wiki and hitting dead ends. Diablo doesn't exactly have the clearest official documentation. But now, I can finally tell you this with confidence, and trust me, putting this video together took hours, honestly days, and I'm giving it to you for free. So if you want to support me, just hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It helps me more than you think. Alright, enough with emotional stuff. Let's get back to the business. One-handed versus two-handed. Two-handers are easier to build around because you only need to temper and masterwork one item instead of two. That's less resource sink. But the trade-off? One-handers swing faster and give you extra flexibility. Running a one-hand plus focus lets you stack extra stats like max resource or cooldown reduction, things you can't slap onto your main weapon. For example, if you're building a perma-teleport Sorc, You need that one-hand setup for the attack speed and CDR, so the choice really depends on your build and playstyle. And don't forget, each weapon type carries its own built-in passive. For example, swords boost crit damage. Maces give you overpower scaling. The key is picking a weapon type that matches your multiplicative damage bucket. Legendary versus unique versus uber unique. Most players usually think that the best items are always the ubers, but that's completely wrong. Sometimes the single most important piece in a build is actually a unique, or even just a legendary. Take Hydra Sorcerer for example, its core item is Ophidian Iris, which is a unique. Without it, the entire build falls apart. Seriously, if you want proof, just take off your Iris and try casting a Hydra. You'll see exactly what I mean. So how do we decide what to use? The way I approach it is like this. First, ask yourself, does my build need a specific unique? Because uniques have passives you simply can't get anywhere else. After that, check your codex of power and lock in which aspects your build relies on. That tells you how many legendary items you'll need, since aspects can only be imprinted onto legendary slots. Then, and only then, look at ubers. Usually you'll end up using between 1 and 3 of them to round out the setup. The key here is structuring your gear around your playstyle while also making sure you're hitting your defensive caps. Since Sorcerer scales with intelligence, you're naturally going to hit resistance cap no matter what, but max life and armor affixes are still insanely valuable. Same with cooldown reduction. That stat is basically your lifeline. That's why in most Sorc builds, Shaco, Harlequin Crest ends up being best in slot. It gives you over 50% cooldown reduction, which is just ridiculous. And yes, the end of the part 1, damage types and gear is completed. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in comments or via Discord. In the next part, I'll break down Paragons and Glyphs, walk you through the skill tree and passives, and reveal some tips and tricks that will improve your gameplay. See you until then.